There we go. Welcome again, everyone. And what is today? Today it should be tax day, but fortunately, it's not for those of us who do our taxes on the last minute. Oh, but speaking of passwords, yeah, we do TurboTax, and you upload your last year's thing to like fill in stuff and then move on. And there's some little glitch with MacBooks that they are anyway. It asked me for a password that I didn't even exist. So kind of crazy, but yeah, anyway. Yeah, so welcome everybody. We were sort of talking a little bit about stress and triggers and things like that. And usually you were asking a question about that.
Yeah, so Sarah mentioned there are some people, they have traumatic experience. So my question is, how many parents in our parenting classes have traumatic experience? And what do you think about this and the rate of that? And yeah, so that is my initial question.
And you're asking me?
You and all the group, yeah, of course, because you mentioned this, right?
I did.
Yes, that is a beginning.
I have no idea. I really don't. It's probably not 100%. It's not 0. It's not 100. Maybe less than 50, but more than 20.
I just assume. I assume in a group of 10 that somebody in the room has suffered trauma.
Always.
Yep.
And I'd even go so far as maybe two out of 10.
Yeah.
I'd be willing to say that 10% of our families have some kind of trauma. And it's been interesting every now and then, like when I'll do a sexuality topic, and I talk about almost every year, you guys, that I do a sexuality unit, I have a parent who tears up in class, or I have a parent who comes up to me or sends me a message after class and says, "Thank you so much for this important topic. I wish I had known this when I was a kid." So right there, I've got families with sexual trauma. Almost every year, I've had someone come up to me. So that right there. And then I also just acknowledge, I don't ever say, who had trauma, but I'll be like, I talk a lot about it when I talk about parent anger and triggers. Because a lot of times I say, sometimes you open your mouth and your parents fall out. And a lot of
cute.
Yeah. I don't know where I got
awesome.
that. I think I made it up, but, and the parents always laugh at that. And I say, sometimes that's a really good thing. If you had really great parents and, they were, wonderful, warm people. I said that sometimes it's not a good thing, depending on how you were parented, and sometimes how you were parented was traumatic. So I always, microwave. I always just assume, and I throw it out there as, yeah, this is real. And a lot of times it makes you do and say things that you wouldn't want to do. But that also tells you that sometimes parenting brings out the worst in you. And I say a lot of times that's if you try to shove things down and away, kids are going to bring it up for you. And I would
go so far as to say that I think at least one every year, I get someone who doesn't realize that they have unresolved trauma. I'm thinking of one mom in particular who very casually said that, her mom just didn't get her and had never told her she loved her. And she didn't find out till she was an adult that she was autistic. And she just knew she was different. And I think there's so many people who don't recognize that as trauma. Like, you never felt loved by your mother. Like, this is huge. And now you're trying to figure out how to be a mother. When we talk about families of origin, I think a lot of people haven't dealt with stuff and don't necessarily realize the impact of their families of origin.
Well, and families of origin can cause challenges to work through that are distinct from trauma, right? So like sibling dynamics that you grow up with, that you're trying to wrestle with as a grown-up, for example, or parent-child stuff that wouldn't necessarily from a therapeutic lens be identified as trauma, but is definitely something to overcome when you're thinking about how you want to parent or you want to be. So then there's all of that too. So yeah.
It's really nuanced in some ways. I don't know how many of you have done any work with ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, but I did a class spring before last about working with that in my other field. And one of the things I think that is really helpful is to be thoughtful about the fact that even if we have experienced trauma, and even if some of these things happen, for example, I don't know that my mom ever told me she loved me. I have no question that my mother cared for me. I have no question whatsoever. So she was from a generation that believed if you told kids that, you messed with them, you spoiled them. And so she didn't. I don't think my dad ever told me that. And I know they both love me. So there's nuance in the pieces and how we do that. But when I started this class, I kind of assumed almost everyone I knew had some ACEs. And I chose to interview about 6 people, and not so much. There were people who had just lived very simple, clear lives of being loved and cherished, and were really surprised by some of the things that other people had experienced.
You were a student in this class or you were a teacher of this class?
I was a student in this class.
Okay.
It was a continuing ed thing through a seminary in Virginia about helping heal from adverse childhood experiences in the context of a community. So
Yeah.
teaching about leading, about a whole variety of things.
And I also have started rephrasing it as reparenting, changing the way you were parented. You know, I say, and I don't know where I got this analogy either, but when you have a baby, that baby is placed in your arms and you are also given a parenting book. And that book was written by your parents. Basically, that is the only, that may be the only experience you have. So in their chapters, it's just a book, right? And there are probably some chapters in that book that you want to keep, but there might be some chapters in that book you want to rip out. And isn't it awesome that we can do that? I'm helping, actually, I might look at her presentation today, but one of my old AmeriCorps volunteers is now getting her master's in nursing. She is the daughter of Chinese immigrants, and she had a very hard childhood. Her parents were abusive. They demanded that she do well in school. And so, you know, the tiger mother approach. So she and I were talking about her paper. But one thing I brought up to her was, she's like, I don't want to do this to my kids. And I was like, and you don't have to. Like, you get to rip out the chapters that you don't like and write new ones. And isn't that a beautiful thing? So, so yeah, it is very nuanced.
That's great, Ellen.
Yeah. Sometimes I say the height of healthy parenting is to look at what your parents did and determine what about it was helpful and try and follow that, and what about it was not helpful and throw that away and name it if it's helpful to you to do that, and look for ways to forgive that.
That's great. So Mary, and like you mentioned ACEs, right? And Sarah talked about the therapeutical psychological definition of trauma. So I'm curious between these two, right? ACEs and the trauma. So what are the differences? And I mean, what do you think there? So is that related to our parenting class?
I think that adverse childhood experiences, the work on that was set up to be things that you could categorically say happened to you or didn't happen to you. Like, I had a family member in prison, or I experienced physical or sexual or emotional abuse. It isn't really a way of what they wanted to do was they were trying to test how much adverse childhood experiences affected adult health. And they determined that, like, if you have 3 or more, you're like 20% more likely to have heart issues. And there's a whole list of physical health things that it means. It doesn't have to mean that, but it contributes to that significantly. I mean, statistically, Humana and was it Stanford did just a ginormous study on this. And so I don't think they don't actually use the word trauma, because they just want to talk about what happened, what happened for sure. I experienced the death of a parent. I can't remember them all offhand, but it names a number of them. One of the things I think is especially difficult to deal with in our context is that physical and I think they don't want to have to measure trauma. I think that's it. I do. I think all of these are obviously adverse, but not one of the things that people are very hesitant to talk about in our classes, and I was very hesitant to talk about until about the last 5 years. We know that people who are abused are more likely to abuse, but many in our society believe that if you were abused, you will abuse. And so I rarely talked about that because it was part of my experience, but I certainly didn't want people to think it was part of my current daily work. I got to a point where I decided I could talk about it a little bit. I had a parent who said one time in a class that spanking was not only essential, but biblical. And first I said, show me where it says that. Explained the meaning of the verses that she was pulling out of context. And then I said, and I also want to know what you mean by spanking, because I have talked to parents who believe that means like a swat on a diapered butt. And that doesn't freak me out too much. But I know some parents believe spanking is like quarter round about the head and shoulders. Okay, that's categorically illegal in our state and reportable. So, people talk about spanking and it's really this big of an understanding of what that is. So I think the first thing you often have to get down to is talking about what are you actually talking about doing or having had done to you.
Thank you, Mary. Yeah.
I would just add what I don't remember how I know this about trauma, but trauma is also subjective. So the same event could be traumatic for one person and not technically traumatic for another. So that's a distinction between ACEs, where you're measuring events, and the human experience of trauma, which is contextual and individual.
And the whole brain child, the very first couple chapters, they talk about big T and little t trauma. And so,
That's right.
And I use that a lot. And so, I have a family whose their 18-month-old had open heart surgery. And I said, that was big T trauma for you as a parent, like she almost died. And for her, little t trauma, she's probably not going to remember it. Then again, you never know. When she goes in at 2.5, 3, she might walk into that hospital and have some, reactions. So yeah, it's interesting to think about big T and little t trauma. Moving, a new baby, little t traumas that don't last forever, but it's still a change and it still brings about some struggles. But hopefully in the context of loving relationships, it doesn't turn into a big T trauma.
And in the stress and coping literature for families is, sort of thinking about the perception of the stress, right? Which can vary for different people, but it's also based on people's perception of the resources that they have to deal with the stress. And which I think is really an important contextual difference. so that when we think about people going through the same trauma or the same adversity, how it could be different. And for somebody, it's big stuff and it's new and they feel very alone and they don't have resources. For somebody else, they've experienced it before, they have that bank of knowledge to sort of go on, they can, they can sense resources. The other thing is the idea of like daily hassles, and that build up so that we can focus on, I don't know if there's like a prioritization of this stuff, but certainly the big T trauma, right? And then the perception of trauma. But there's also, because it's easy for people to minimize hassles, right? And it's just like, oh, it's just one more thing, right? But that build up for that individual of those stressors of traffic and smoke alarms and babies crying and I talked to I have a graduate student who started the program, just had a baby, right? There's been not only COVID in the household, but repeated sicknesses, and you name it, one thing after another, and nobody would take any one of those individually and say that's trauma, right? But when you see how absolutely worn out she is after, it's also, because I think sometimes when we talk about trauma, right, there's also the minimizing by some people. Oh, and this was really interesting too, because in the child abuse literature, I used to do a lot of debates in my classes with students about and they would read Murray Strauss's work and they would read Lars Ulrich's work, and Murray Strauss would talk about where he would be working with like medical students. And again, it's that perceptual difference of, where they would be talking about sort of spanking, and there would be somebody in the group who would talk about, being basically beaten with the father's belt and just assuming that's what everybody else experienced, but it wasn't until there was a discussion and the reaction from other people that was supportive and sympathetic, that the individual realized that what they had in fact dealt with was not a normative experience of parental discipline.
So Anne Maston is a resilience researcher. She's actually out of the U of M, and Lisa D'Amour referenced her in a podcast, like in the bleak midst of COVID, in terms of how do we support kids to be resilient through the stresses. And so her research is super interesting and emphasizes the importance of, so Lisa D'Amour also talked about research they've done, and maybe this is part and parcel Anne Maston's research, but kids who went through World War II and were, sorry, I'm going to cough, separated from their parents in England, and then, or not, and then have just endured things like war or like hardcore poverty, stuff like that, that you can think of would be very difficult. And took a look at the kids who seemed to be resilient despite that. And Susan, you nodded, so correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the single most important thing was the presence of an invested, caring adult who was able to be calm and present themselves in the life of the child. So, and what's the other word? Something positive regard, unfailing positive regard. Is that what it was for the child? Somebody had, I think it was Lisa D'Amour's term and not Anne Maston's term, but it was like consistent positive regard. Unconditional positive regard for the child.
The most common comment I've gotten in my work outside of parent ed in the last couple of years is that I'm so calm. And I suppose that's in the middle of COVID or in the middle of whatever else. And I often say I experience that because of some experiences I've had in my past that I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy. When my twins were born, one wasn't breathing. He was immediately intubated and is fine and is a whole healthy adult. And I realize that's not everyone's experience, but it is mine. And so I cherish those pieces, and I'm not, I mean, yes, it was awful. I didn't know that he had been born not breathing until after he was breathing again. There were two of them being born. We were kind of busy. When he was 3, he managed to set the kitchen on fire. I was on the phone across the kitchen, and when a little voice behind me said, "Look, Mommy, I'm cooking lunch," I turned around and there were flames licking the bottom of a cupboard. There were some books and papers near the stove, and he'd found the knob that goes on the gas stove and turned it, and he's cooking lunch, and we're leaving. We left later that year. We had a flood in the lower level of the house because the guys who were fixing the upper level cut all the power, including the sump pump, and there was a 5-inch rain in an hour in Burnsville. I started my pastoral internship in September in 6 different churches in the southeast Minnesota. And then on December 18th, same child it gave us what we referred to as our $4,000 anniversary party, which meant he left in an ambulance from the house we were living in with his father to go to Fairview Ridges in respiratory distress and seizing. And they didn't know which had caused the other. And they had a challenging time figuring it out and stopping it. Now, as a parent who's walked away from all that with enormous support outside me, just enormous. When that kid lit fire to the house, we had a spare house 3 blocks away. Who the hell has a spare house? But my mother-in-law had died the September before. I'm married to an only child. We hadn't got it on the market. People said, "Why hadn't you got it on the market?" I have 3-year-old twins and I'm in a master's program. I mean, really? So all those things really contributed to what it takes for me to freak out. Doesn't mean nothing affects me. Just means that, you know, I have the, even as a small child, I was in a family that had some real significant problems, including alcoholism, surrounded by an extended family who adored me and all 4 of us and supported us, including my mom and dad. So, you know, I could look at this and look at that and go, oh, this is not good, that's good, even as a young person. So, like I said, I wouldn't wish most of that on my worst enemy, but it has been, there have been blessings that have come out of that for me. So.
I had a dad attend in place of mom on Wednesday night. And they are Ukrainian immigrants to the US, and they've been here for 10, 15, maybe longer years. But nonetheless, and then her mother lives with them here. They don't have any of his parents. No close family is there right now, but of course, plenty of people they know and love are there. And he shared that their 2-year-old this week managed to throw the remote control at their big flat screen TV and crack the spider web. And all the parents in the room are aghast, of course. And he was like, we just moved the other TV up from the basement. It's much nicer to have a smaller TV. It's going to be summer. Who cares? We're going to be outside most of the time anyway. I was like, okay, that's perspective. And he said, you know, I think about what's going on at home, and you know, it's like, ugh. So you don't have a 60-inch flat screen TV anymore. Now you only have a 42-inch. Whatever. Wow.
Yeah. So I really appreciate the sharing, Sarah and Mary. And actually, Mary's experience is also what I use to encourage the parents in my class. I mean, I have been teaching only over 1 year, right? So I have teaching like maybe 8, 9 parents. So from my experience, I observed it almost like, I'm surprised when I hear you say there's only 1 or 2 in your class, you know, like had kind of adverse or traumatic experience. So from my experience, I see like almost every parent in my class had significant trauma or just, you know, adverse childhood experience, and that is some conditioning for their parenting too. I feel you know, the behavior pattern almost always have back up like something related to that, some kind of cause. And I feel like, just like Ellen said, parenting, right? Parenting is actually reframing. Through parenting, right? So I feel like, I heard, one parent emphasized the parenting education class to her as a therapeutic. So, and she gave me many examples what happened in her life since she taking the parenting class. I feel like, parenting class we are assisting the parents to go through this parenting, the process of their parenting actually could be a healing process for the parents. Go through parenting, they are actually healing themselves. That is a very great opportunity for them to reframe their life and their perspective. So I feel that is kind of a significant meaning to parenting education. And I feel if we can, for me, right, if I can learn more from that, maybe I can help the parents in a more significant way. So that is my experience. And I seek information from you, or like some, like you mentioned some books or some people's work, university work. Those can be interesting. So I wonder if there are some resources to share.
Well, and Yuji, I think I'm going to caution you here. Yeah, Growing Up Again. I was trying to think of it. Growing Up Again is a great book. And I would say, and Parenting from the Inside Out, those two. And I would say, read those two and be done. I think they give you a really good base level understanding of some parents and where they're at, but you have to be very careful. I think it's safe to assume that a lot of parents have, like I said, baggage. Everyone has baggage. And a lot of that baggage comes out. There it is, Parenting from the Inside Out. And, but you have to be very careful because you're not a therapist and you do not want it to go to therapy. And you're right. Like, I think we can be facilitators in that you don't have to parent the way your parents did, and you can change it. And isn't that awesome? But if parents have significant trauma, or not even trauma, little t, little baggage, big baggage, we are not the ones to do that. And we need to know, like, you're right. Little things can be done, but if there's big stuff, that's not going to be done in our classrooms. So I love that you want to know about it, but I don't want you thinking you can fix, because some of our parents have real big issues, and that's when it's really important to say, have you considered seeing a therapist?
I know people who have started in parent ed and have moved on to get counseling degrees, because this is where their passion is, like dealing with that family therapy type stuff. But it's not part of our job or our role as it is as a parent educator.
Not our wheelhouse.
Thank you, Ellen and Becca. But the thing is, what I struggle is, I feel like, right, so there must be some kind of boundaries between and some kind of connections. So where we can go, how far we can go, right? And the purpose is to help the parents. So my struggle is, so I see, right? So yeah, we provide many like tools and skills. It's very helpful. But the thing is, so when it, like the parents are conditioned by some kind of their, patterns or something, so even though they have the skills, they have the knowledge, and they have the will but they just cannot, they don't have the capacity to implement or to maintain that. So that is some struggle I'm witnessing in some parents. So I wonder, how can we proceed, to navigate between parent educator, and definitely we are not, equipped to counseling, right? So, but how do we help the parents better? That is a struggle I have right now.
I think daily acknowledging that this is the hardest work they'll ever do. And that it's hard and it's vulnerable. And that's why if I have a week where someone, admitted something, that when we come back that week, I'll be like, and sometimes I'll send an email, but usually I do it in person and I'll be like, wow, last week was amazing. You guys were super vulnerable together. And, a lot of learning comes from that because this is hard work. I think acknowledging that it's hard makes parents realize like, oh yeah, I really messed that up and that's okay because I'm human and my child is human. So I think acknowledging that this is no walk in the park. This is hard. I think doing that every single day of your work with families has one of the biggest impacts. And then knowing when to make referrals. And admitting to families, yeah, that's what, Mary Kay, yeah, just, and then to say, I'm not trained to help you with this, but I know I can see that you need more help than I can give. And it used to scare the crap out of me to do that. But I had a mom one day, and this was several years ago, and I just said, I'm going to say something and it might make you mad, So, but I've known you for a couple of years now, and I'm hearing some things from you that are concerning, and I don't have the training, but I do know that what you're dealing with is it's not healthy. And I can't help you, but what I can do is, encourage you to see someone. And she did. And 2 years later, I left the district. She found me on Facebook. She sent me a message and she said, I cannot thank you enough. I had to, I did go to therapy. I uncovered a whole lot of stuff and my parenting is so much better. So I did nothing except tell her to go find a therapist. That's what you can do.
Thank you, Ellen.
Susan stepped
Becca,
up.
can I ask a question about that's something that came up last week from Manafi? So the marshmallow test reference in the Manafi presentation, I wasn't in that. Can you tell me how the marshmallow test was characterized in the Manafi presentation?
It was presented as the old way. What we've heard, that this is the single thing that can determine how you will succeed as an adult.
Got it. So that
Not
was the way.
Acknowledging the stuff that you thankfully sent, how ableist it is and classist, and so many other factors go into how a child will respond to that test.
That's what I gleaned from your share out. Like it was like the marshmallow test is tricky.
Yeah.
To hear about, right? Depending on how it's described, whether it's a modern characterization of what those results meant and how they can be interpreted versus the traditional original way.
Mm-hmm.
But I was curious because I was not in the session and I didn't ask last week, so I gathered.
I felt like the session overall was really great,
Mm-hmm.
but that one has always been really hard for me personally.
Of course.
So,
well, there's a real problem with sharing the original conclusions of that study as the conclusions of that study.
Because it's not replicable on a large scale with different populations.
And my colleague Joy Walker, some of you may know, I think she's been on this a few times. She has used it to talk about equity, and if your adult, if it is actually a measure of how consistently reliable your adult is, and whether you can count on your adult to come back. And your lived experience, your pattern of experience with adults is that they are consistent and reliable, and they do come back, or they don't always. If they don't always come back, you're going to eat the goddamn marshmallow. Because you don't know, right? And that's not stupid. That's actually quite rational.
Or if you have poverty and you don't have food security, it's just I'm going to eat what's in front of me because I may not have this another time.
That's right. So it's actually it's a great lesson on racial bias and biases in general, right? And how research can be so problematic.
Yeah.
Becca,
So-
which one was that? Which breakout? What was that?
It's all mushed together in my head.
know.
I think it was the very first
Right.
Becca session that
After the.
you did the distance learning one, and I
Oh,
did
okay.
Becca.
Okay.
So if we went back and looked at it, I could
Well,
say what it was, but I don't have it in front of
I
me.
have mine right here. I just put it in my bag.
I feel like somebody else mentioned it though. I feel like somebody, and I was like, oh, somebody, maybe it was someone dumped it in a chat. Somebody put in the chat, here's the most updated marshmallow test.
I put the Atlantic article.
That was in this last week, and Becca was here for
Okay.
that. So I think
That's
she
what it
kind of
was.
she acknowledged
Okay.
some of it, but
So are you saying that I think I've referred to it. I've maybe showed it once or twice. And then it went around last year where parents would set their phones up and record their kids and be like, like they wanted to see, can you not eat the M&Ms? I'm going to go to the bathroom. And they loved, I had a couple families who did it. They loved seeing their kids like, no, Mom, are you coming back? So do you remember that little thing that was going around last year?
No,
Yeah.
I didn't see that. That's cute. Yeah.
It is cute, but so should we not, like I said, I've barely ever talked about it. So should we just forget it, ignore it, pretend it was never done? Like,
Well, I just think it's a different lesson than that. It doesn't
Yeah.
predict what the original conclusions say it predicted, like ability to resist the temptation to eat the first marshmallow in the service of waiting for the second marshmallow, the ability to delay that gratification. This researchers originally said is predictive of success later in life.
yeah.
And
I've always
Becca?
used that as, I'm sorry, didn't mean to interrupt.
no, I was going
I've
to
always
yield to
used
Becca.
that as a way to show what the coping skills are. So, and knowing that not everybody comes into those coping skills easily. So,
You mean as the kids struggle to wait? Yeah,
yes.
it is cute to watch them wrestle. Like you were talking about Ellen, the more updated, the homegrown version of it. Yeah.
They're like thinking about it.
But I
and-
think if
Can
you're
I
going to
smell
show
it?
that
Can I
it
lick
is,
it?
yeah, they lick it, they smell it, you know, but I think if you're going to show that research, you are really honor bound to explain
That it
the
doesn't work
newer
for everyone.
interpretation of the results.
Mhm.
Right. This
Well-
was a tiny group of Stanford kids. Like
Kids
it-
of Stanford faculty
Yeah.
in this 50s or 60s. I mean, they pretty much had everything going for them.
Yeah.
It was little one's big brain development.
Okay. And hey, are they going to post the videos and slides? Has anyone been back on the Menafee page to see if that's been posted? There's a lot of stuff.
I found
wanna see.
handouts and stuff, which had some of the slides from some of the presentations.
Yes, it's going to take time. I mean, to get the video recordings of the Zoom sessions, because it's
They're in
done
the
through a
cloud.
third-party group.
Oh.
So my
Got it.
guess is that, like.
Oh, they're up. They're up. The
Oh,
recordings
well,
are
just
here.
Forget that then. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, here, I'll copy and paste. I checked earlier this week and they weren't there, but yay.
Anybody, like, we haven't gotten the email with evaluation stuff to get credit yet or anything, right? I always
No.
worry about that because with my ADHD, I will forget about it and then it will be like I never get credit for it because I never find it, or I don't know.
It
So-
hasn't come through yet.
Okay.
But now here are all the recordings, Yuji. So now you can see everything. They're all here. Ooh. Awesome. They're all here. Terrific. Love it.
I've thought a lot about that first keynote. I bought both of her books, and I'm like, I want to teach a class. I want to teach a book study on her stuff. It's okay to go up the slide. I like that.
Becca, in your inbox at 11:57, they sent the CEU form.
Thank you. I have been running around and definitely didn't look at it 11. Perfect.
Growing up
Are they
again.
making those publicly
Oh,
available
sorry.
or to people who?
I think it's only if you registered for Menafee.
Okay.
For the conference that you get access to all the videos, but I could be wrong.
Look at that. Look at that, Ellen.
Yuji, you're muted. It's not working, Yuji. I think your headset's not working. Because it shows actually, yeah, I'm sorry, you're not muted, but you're also not working. Nope,
Hear you.
nothing. Nothing.
Type something in the chat.
Or unplug your headset. I think your headset's probably broken. It's jamming up your microphone, but it's also not working. Just, or type it in the chat. Nothing. What else is going on, friends?
We had a death in the family this week.
Oh,
Oh,
I'm so sorry.
Yeah, but it was my daughter's cat died, like
Oh.
oh,
at 3 years old.
Oh,
oh.
Yeah, and it was this, I mean, it was
it's unexpected.
very well, and she was here and she lives in Chicago. And
Oh, she wasn't even
yeah,
home.
so she was here, and then
Mhm.
but I want to shout out to Sarah, who is with Heather and a colleague doing the reflective dialogue, and
Ah, yes. Thank
on
you.
May 6th.
May 6th. Yeah.
Wait, what are you doing? Huh? Say what?
I put it on Friends of Family Education. It is a
Oh.
reflective dialogue project that I've been working on with a colleague of mine, Denisha Bailey from
Nice, good for you.
196.
I did
And
see
Heather
it. I just
Klein.
clicked on the details.
Yeah, it's gonna be interesting. Becca was there for the kind of internal dry run. Thank you, Becca, for being there for that.
It was great.
Thanks. Yeah, it's a compelling video, and I loved the conversation. Actually, Becca and I haven't connected since, but it was about that. But I'm excited. I've heard from a number of people that they're signed up. I haven't talked to Heather about, she's handling the registration, so I don't know the numbers, but it's an experiment. We'll see what happens.
So is that included in the fee? So I need some clarification. Is it
Yep.
$250 forever, or is it $250 a year? for
That's such
reflective
a great
dialogue?
question.
Because I think
you
I was
know?
like, you know what?
Because I'm
just
a
gonna-
lifetime member, but I think I paid more than that, or I should say GPS paid more than that.
Well, because I went, I was like, you know what? I'm just gonna buy this, and then it said $250 annually, and I was like, no.
Heather, ask Heather, because there's something about like the way it's set up. Because I think I'm a lifetime member also, and I did it right when she very first started. And
It makes it look like it's $250 annual, but it's
Yeah.
like that. You can't
think
change
so.
the word to
Right.
lifetime.
I think that's right.
You want to double check with her, so it'll come up as like an
Okay.
annual subscription, but you only ever pay once. Does that
Yeah.
make sense?
'Cause I looked at it and I was like, oh, heck no.
Right.
Yeah,
I'm gonna
that's
pay
a lot.
$250 a year for this.
Definitely ask Heather directly. Like I would send
Okay,
her
I
a
will.
message and get
So
clarification.
is this included, Sarah? Is there a fee on top? Is there a little training fee on top of that?
I think if you're a member, that's such a great question.
Okay.
I don't know. It's $40.
I'll do some digging.
Is what I can tell you. It's $40, but email
Oh,
Heather
okay.
about all of it. And I should know the answer to your second question. I know she's bundling it for people who sign up for the summer
Oh yeah, I did that
Like-
last summer.
refresh.
Mhm.
But I couldn't tell you about existing members.
Got it.
That's a great question.
Let me go find that post.
I
Yeah,
could
thanks,
be
Susan.
wrong, but I kind of feel like when you have a lifetime membership, you kind of get everything.
I-
That's been kind
that's
of
my
my
hunch.
experience anyway. It's like, it's all included.
That's
But
my
I
hunch.
think-
So my next question, sorry, are you going to record that, Sarah? So, because I teach from 9 to 10 on Fridays, and getting a sub is really hard.
No, I'm sorry. That's good feedback. We're not going to record it because it is such an emergent and dynamic and vulnerable conversation.
Yeah. Okay.
And just like with any parent ed, like when you're recording, all of a sudden people change what they're going to say, when, how,
Mhm.
and you lose some of that. So we made the hard decision not to.
Sure. Okay, sounds good. Bummer.
You know, and I would respect Heather's business model, whatever she's doing with this, so that, you know, there's that tension between open, like my materials or everybody's materials, and oh, you missed it. Well, here's what we talked about, you know, kind of thing. And then the problem with that model is it's very equitable, but it won't put any money in Heather's pocket, right? I mean, and if she's growing her business, she needs content to sell. And so, and also an incentive for people to do the 250 over the year or to attend on an individual basis. Cause it's like, oh, well, why
yeah.
would I bother paying the whatever? Because I can just, you know,
Right.
get it free. So,
Well, and the reason I asked is I was like, oh, if it's included, then I've been dragging my feet on that $250 thing.
Yeah.
Especially until I get clarification. And then I was like, well, if this is included, then I will not drag my feet anymore and I will just go do it.
Aw.
So
Yeah, send her a note and let us know what you learn.
sure, I will do so.
I'm sure she'll get right back to you. Thanks, Susan. Thanks for the shout out.
yeah. Oops.